card going around, and that is for Karen Ganser.
Better if I stand
And so
there.
happy birthday to Karen
I
Ganser.
can see better.
I just want to thank Terry Cregan for coming and filling in for his wife Mary, videotaping for us. I really appreciate that. And I just want to let everybody know we have Mike back. Did you see Mike? I'm sure Mike is upstairs at the front desk saying, "You must sign the guest book." But Mike is with us for maybe 90 days, who knows. He's an injured truck driver and he gets paid by his company to come and help us out. So he did this for, I think, over a year, about 4 years ago. He knows how to do everything. So it's awesome. But he'll give you a hard time, just so you know, because that's just Mike. I want to thank everybody so very much that helped with the Gene Buckner. Remember, we had the Gene Buckner get-together at the other building on Sunday at 2 o'clock. A couple of you were there. We didn't have very many people, and everybody said, "Well, you get to be that age." But you know, it was a wonderful, wonderful program, and if you missed it, I'm really sorry. But we have a YouTube channel, and thanks to Sarah Jones, it will be up there, and at least you can see parts of it. And we just try to remember all the wonderful things that Jean did for us, all these years, all the beautiful exhibits and things that we have at the museum that she did. The Peace Pipe Players did a wonderful tribute to her that, you know, I'm sure you wouldn't want to miss. And then at the very end, her son Jay, she only has Jay and a grandson Ben here, who wasn't going to say anything because he didn't think he could, just gave a wonderful, wonderful talk about his mother and some of the things that maybe we wouldn't have known about her otherwise. So it was wonderful. Want to remind you that our next event is Thursday, July 13th. That's our annual meeting. It'll be at the main museum at 7 o'clock. David Kendall, who gives wonderful programs, is going to be there to give the program. He's going to be talking about the story of our Civil War sword, the one that has just returned to Macokota after all these many years. It was presented to Lieutenant Kelsey of Company A of the 9th Iowa, right? Okay, gotta have that right. By the people of Macokota in 1861. And so that sword has traveled around, and it's finally come home to Macokota, and we're excited to have it. David is going to have that whole story. I was asked to remind you that stamps are going up. If you need stamps, you need to buy them, I think, by the end of this month. They're going to, maybe the 1st of July, I'm not sure just when, but very, very soon. The 6th of July? Okay, thank you for that. Also, Roger, tomorrow is the Rotary's Ice Cream Social, is that right?
That's right.
And everybody's invited?
Yes, everybody.
Okay.
And the band will be there.
The band will be there. It's, I understand, ice cream at 6,
Yes,
concert at 6:30.
yes.
Bring your lawn chair, and it's at the pavilion at the fairgrounds like it is every year. It's a wonderful thing to go to, and everybody, it's free for everybody. Okay, next week, Brown Bag Lunch. We'll not have a program because it's the 4th of July. And everybody will be out celebrating, so we'll be closed on the 4th of July. And then I just want to tell you how grateful I am to Sue Mayberry for doing this program today. She's going to be talking about Major Samuel Foster, again, about the Civil War. And I really appreciate her. She had to really hurry up. She wasn't quite ready. We nudged her along. So,
Light.
And I think, oh, I don't have much. Okay. Turn that off. Are you going to turn those? Are you going to turn them on?
Tell me when.
But you're going to turn it that way. Instead of that way. It turns the other way, right?
Well, yeah, but it's to light your face.
Can I please not have that on?
Okay, that's fine.
It's going to probably trigger a migraine, so I'd rather not have that right now.
Okay.
Okay, so as Vonnie said, it's Major Samuel Foster and the 2nd Iowa Cavalry, Company M. So I have to back up a little bit to tell you how, I came up with this presentation. Starting here, neglected pioneer cemeteries. Well, my husband has a lot of ancestors that are buried in Sweezy Cemetery. And in 1975, we decided that we were going to go up there and clean up this cemetery. So we took, shovels, cleaning supplies, I suppose wire brushes and all of that. Brought along some food for a picnic. We got up there, and it's like, okay, we need backhoes, we need chainsaws, we need, people that are a lot stronger than I was to be able to help them. So really, we didn't do anything from that point on until 20 years later, we were living beside the cemetery. So when we first moved there, the cemetery was in pretty bad shape. And, these are not the stones from the cemetery, but basically that's what it looked like. One of the first things we started with, after we got the trees taken down, because a lot of trees had kind of, grew into the stones, or the stones were, poked into the trees. And then we had these probes made, and we probed for stones, and we found over 40 stones that were buried underneath, that had been buried prior to the 1930s, because in the 1930s there were the WPA surveys listing all of those names. Possibly there's more stones too. When they put that gravel frontage road in, we did have a number of people tell us that when the county came in, they just dug right through and just, I don't know for sure, to verify that or not, but hoping that didn't happen. So then the Pioneer Cemetery was working about that same time too, working on restoring the cemeteries, and they were going to start holding workshops, and they decided to hold the first one at our cemetery. And the date that they picked, and of course keep in mind that they wanted to use our house then would serve as a bathroom, for the people working there. We were going to cooking some meals out of our kitchen, and I think they picked like the due date of my third child. I said, I don't think this is going to work out very well for me. So they did delay it by about maybe 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, and so that was still maybe not perfect timing for me, having all those people come in, when I had a newborn at home with one bathroom. So Sweezy Cemetery is located 7 miles north of Macoka on Highway 61. While we were uncovering the ones that were buried, we found this one, and it was the oldest one. Found out that they were the children of Samuel and Merelda Foster. And I always wondered, what happened to the parents? Were they just like passing through? They had 2 children die, they're buried here. And, it just always kind of bothered me, wondering what happened. I tried to do some research back then, but it was a lot harder to be able to find things than it is today. But what I did find out was that Merelda Foster's maiden name was Sweezy, hence Sweezy Cemetery. So it was her father that had donated the land for the cemetery, for his grandchildren to be born in. So Samuel Foster II, he is the subject of our presentation, married to Merelda Sweezy. They are buried at the Preston Cemetery. Samuel Foster II was born November 1826 in Mercer County, Pennsylvania. He died in 1893 in Preston. At the age of 35, actually I might have this wrong, because I was thinking he had gotten discharged when he was 35, but he enlisted in the Civil War in 1861 with the 2nd Iowa Cavalry, Company M, with the enlisted rank of First Lieutenant. And on February 1863, he was promoted to captain. Then transferred November 1864 to Unit M, from Unit M to Unit S, and was promoted major. He mustered out in 1865 in Selma, Alabama. A major is 3rd in command of an infantry, cavalry, or artillery regiment, and assisted the colonel in administrative and combat duties. If the colonel and the lieutenant colonel are killed or wounded, the major takes command of the regiment. Samuel's height was listed as 5'8½". He had a dark complexion, dark hair, hazel eyes. He was in the mercantile business in Spragueville after the Civil War. He also lived in Preston for a while, where he and Marilda raised Albert Foster Dawson, son of their daughter, Alilia A., also went by Alice, I think was her given name. And Alice was married to Thomas Dawson. Alilia died in 1873 when Albert was very young. The children of Samuel and Marilda, they had 4 daughters and 2 sons. Their son, Samuel Scott Foster III, married Lucy Brady. He and his wife are buried at Mount Hope. The parents of Samuel Foster II. His father, Samuel Foster, was born in 1789 in Virginia and died in 1848 in Mercer County, Pennsylvania. Samuel had served in the War of 1812. So there is, from the history book of Mercer County, Pennsylvania, it says, this is about Samuel's father. One Foster, a young man in the service of Mr. Conch, called to serve in the War of 1812, needed a pair of socks. When Mrs. Conch learned of this problem, she caught a sheep, sheared and spun the wool, and had the socks knit and ready for him as he prepared to go. I just thought that was pretty amazing. So when I discovered, that Marilda was a Sweezy, and then about that same time I also discovered that Samuel's second, his parents had 7 children and 7 grandchildren. I'm sorry, they had more children and grandchildren than that, but as far as men, 7 men that were their children and 7 grandchildren that were men that served in the Civil War. And it was said that President Lincoln sent a letter to his mother expressing condolences on the loss of the 7 family members. And it said that an article was written in the Sharon Herald in 1952, and I haven't been able to find that article, but I think that would explain a lot. So I was able to find 4 of the 7 foster men who lost their lives in the Civil War. So Samuel Foster II, 2 of his brothers, died on the same day, John and James. And then 2 nephews died of camp fever, one in 1862 and one in 1864. Marilda's parents were Thomas and Alice Forbes Sweezy. Thomas Sweezy was born in Pennsylvania in 1813. His father, who was of German descent, was born in the eastern part of Pennsylvania, and when a boy crossed the mountains into Mercer County, and thus he became one of their early settlers. He bought land and resided there, engaging in farming and stock raising until his death. When a young man, he bought wild land and cleared a farm out of the Pennsylvania forest. He was married in Pennsylvania and continued to live there until 1849, when he came with his family by boat to Iowa. Landing in Bellevue and making his way to Perry Township, he bought a tract of government land. He bought other land adjacent to his homestead and at one time owned 600 acres of valuable farming land. He was one of the first to see the advantages of full-blooded Durham cattle and to introduce them to the state. He had a large herd and took a number of premiums at the county and state fairs. In 1861, he moved to Andrew to engage in the hotel business until 1866. That year, he moved back to his farm and resided there for the next 2 years. Then he rented his place and he moved to Mount Vernon for the purpose of educating his children. Then he went to Kansas, laid out the town of Halstead in Harvey County, and then he came back to Perry, to his farm, and was engaged in managing that until 1878. Then he moved to Andrew and lived in retirement until 1881. Then he went back to Kansas to visit his children, and unfortunately he passed away that following year in 1882, and I believe he passed away in Kansas. He was an active member of the Methodist Episcopal Church. In his early days, he was a Whig, and in times of anti-slavery agitation was an earnest abolitionist. He was twice married. By his first union, for which Marilda was born, there were 5 children. And his second marriage to Elizabeth King, 2 children were born to this union. I was really thrilled when I was able to find a few weeks ago this picture of Marilda Foster. I still have not been able to find one of Samuel. There are different accounts as to how old she was when she got married, but I really do think she was just 15 when she married Major Foster. You know, the way they list the birth dates make it look like she could be anywhere from 10 to 20 years old, but I really do believe 15 is the correct year. So she suffered, you know, a lot of losses in her lifetime. She lost her mother when she was just 4 years old. Her father did remarry the next year. And she lost her sister when she was just 29. She lost her father when she was 56. And after her husband died, she was committed by her son to the asylum in Independence. And she remained there until the death a few years later at age 60. And then also what, you know, hardships she had to go through. She had, her brother was 18 years old, and I'm trying to think how old she would have been at that time, but, well, probably was 10, when he joined the 12th Cavalry of Missouri. And then she had another brother, and I'll tell you about him later. So Alice A., wife of Thomas Dawson, was the mother of Albert Foster Dawson. He was given to his grandparents to raise after she died. Sadly, Alice's sister, Elizabeth Foster, died a month later, May 1st, 1878. These 2 sisters are buried together in Andrews Cemetery. So the Fosters had two small children at Sweezy and 2 at Andrew, but yet they are buried in Preston. So over a month ago is where I found out where to even resume my search with Samuel Foster, because I was reading one of the history books that we had, and there it showed him. Samuel Foster, Preston, Iowa. So I just had no idea that that's where he ended up. And I actually found out I had quite a bit of information already about Albert Foster Dawson, because as it turns out, you've heard me talk about Henry McNeil before, but it was Henry McNeil's sister. Her great-great-granddaughter, I believe it is, had married him. So I just didn't make that connection before. There was an article about Albert Foster Dawson that said he was a self-made man who fought his way to his present high station through a long, hard fight to overcome difficulties that seemed overwhelming. He was born in Spragueville. Talks about how he was raised by Major and Mrs. Samuel Foster. And Samuel and Marilda Foster's youngest was just 2 years older than Albert Foster Dawson. So it's kind of like, you know, he had a brother close to his same age. The article talked about how that he was, his grandparents were poor, and Major Foster had failing health, and that kept him from doing a lot of the heavy work. So after his grandfather died, he kind of had to shift for himself, and he began working at brickyards, and then later there'll be some slides telling about the rest of his life. So Albert Foster Dawson, who's included in the Hall of Fame, had many accomplishments as listed on that slide. And I'm just going to kind of let you read a few of those, and then I'm going to move on just because I have so much fun in here. Shown is Dawson's home while he was serving as president of First National Bank of Davenport. Picture courtesy of Caroline Brady Camp. The 2nd Iowa Cavalry was the only regiment of the early Iowa Cavalry which maintained its individuality throughout the war, and was, upon the whole, the largest cavalry regiment in the West, usually numbering not less than 800 men. Other cavalry regiments were divided up, but the officers of the 2nd opposed any separation, and securing for the command a most enviable record and the nation's praise. During the first term of the 3rd Battalion, Companies E, K, L, and M were armed with sabers, carbines, and hence did most of the charging. while the 1st and 2nd battalions, being armed with Colt reviving rifles, figured less in dashing exploits, but did more hard fighting. Of the 2nd Regiment, Companies I and M were from Jackson County. And I wonder if that should be L instead of I. Type that wrong. I found some interesting connections between the cavalry men and their wives, and this might explain, how Marilda came to marry Major Foster. So George Washington Sweezy, Marilda's brother, served in the same company as her husband. Her sister Elizabeth Ann Sweezy married Moses Blank. He also served in the same company as a saddler. Marilda's other sister, Sarah J. Sweezy, was married to Richard Hildreth McDonald. And guess what? He also served in Company M as well. Richard is buried in Kansas with his 2nd wife, Jenny McDonald. George Sweezy, Marilda's brother, was an officer in the late war, serving as sergeant in the 2nd Iowa Cavalry from September 1861 until the cessation of the hostilities. He was taken prisoner at one time, but was released on parole and subsequently joined his regiment. A prisoner of war badge is shown on the right. Numerous Iowa men joined companies raised in border states. Iowa was at the time a relatively new state, just undergoing the settlement process. Many who had migrated to Iowa from other states returned to serve in regiments of their native states. It is estimated that about 2,000 Iowa men enlisted in other states, with nearly half being in the state of Missouri. Shown is the camp of the 29th Iowa. Right there, sorry. Okay. I skipped a slide. Okay, the 1st Iowa was fitted with uniforms of a sleazy fabric, thought inadequate for summer in Missouri. The men arrived at the front with their uniforms so badly worn. So what they did, they took some aprons and they wore those backwards. An officer, observing this, sharply ordered the men to turn the aprons around. The resulting disclosure brought a hasty change in command. A quote from the soldier at Camp McClellan: "The fairgrounds at Davenport were assigned us for camp, and the barracks constructed for us. While at Davenport, our time was occupied learning the school of the trooper dismount and acquiring the knowledge of fencing under the tutorage of a German gladiator by the name of Groffner. Officers paid him $5 each, and enlisted men $2.50 for his instruction." The good citizens of Davenport claimed us as their regiment. Dust and mud were an intolerable burden to the camps in the cities. The sidewalks were in sad disrepair from constant use. Hogs and cattle roamed at will. Householders of the 60s fenced the animals out, and wooden fences vanished in the smoke of cooking fires. As the loaded boats slowly sailed down the river, watched by crowds of well-wishers, their cheers turning to tears, the billowing smoke of the funnels hung low over the yellow rolling water and drifted across the treetops lining the banks. Riverboats burned pitch pine beneath their boilers, and so heavy was the traffic, the sluggish, oily smoke was always there. As quoted from the soldier at the Davenport barracks, "While at Davenport, the state of Iowa presented us with the standard colors. The flag was presented to Colonel Elliott by General Baker. We left Iowa for Benton Barracks, St. Louis. Here we were crowded into small, poorly ventilated barracks, and being in the initiatory stage of our career as soldiers, which has proved by far the most fatal period in the history of military men diseases in our ranks. Although we were in St. Louis for about 60 days, over 60 of our number found their graves there. So he went on to say that, you know, even when they were fighting in battle every single day, they didn't lose as many in that period of time as they did at the barracks. Edward Hatch, second commander, originally a major, rose to colonel and then brigadier general in 1864. He was stationed on duty at the White House. Soon he was ordered to take charge of the Davenport camp and was commissioned captain of the 2nd Iowa Cavalry. Edward Hatch was severely wounded in December of 1863. In May, under his command, they reached Corinth. Under his leadership, the 2nd became one of the best cavalry units in the entire Army. For gallantry, he was brevetted Major General. Hatch was in 40 engagements, in most of which the 2nd was with him. By mid-1864, the 7-shot Spencer was in the hands of some units, including the 2nd Iowa. There was an article that appeared in the paper, and it was signed an old soldier, telling them to buy like a rubber blanket, and the best hat to use would be a light-colored soft felt. Avoid strong coffee and oily meat. General Scott said that too free use of these, together with neglect in keeping the skin clean, cost many a soldier his life in Mexico. So the 2nd Cavalry Company M men from Jackson County I have listed, and the ones that I knew the ages, I've got their ages. I'm going to flip through these a little bit quickly just because we'll talk about some of those men later. But if you notice with the colors, I kind of grouped the ones that have the same last name. And looking at the ages, you know, you can kind of tell whether or not it's father, son, or brothers. So probably the Abels or Abels were all brothers. And Bonnie didn't think that any of the Gibsons maybe were related. Do you recognize some of the names? I mean, some look familiar. And this is just, you know, this is just Company M. And there may be some that I've left out because sometimes, you know, if they got transferred or re-enlisted. This map depicts the major battles, battles and skirmishes, camps and garrisons, prisons, and the movement of the 6th Iowa Infantry. It really doesn't show up very well. I don't think you can see that. More than 76,000 Iowa men served, nearly 1/2 of all military-age men. Iowa, in proportion to its population, provided more troops than any other state in the Union. I did not know that before this. 67 men paid commutation, an option that allowed drafted men to buy their way out of military service. Less than 4,000 men took the option of supplying an able-bodied man in his place. Senator Joseph B. Flatt. Iowa did more to contribute men to the fighting lines. Our state provided leadership behind the lines. The officers that led our regiments were already leaders in our young state. They were the men who, in the decades following the war, were the leaders of our state and our nation. It is our proud heritage and one that each of us should know and honor. Senator Flatt was born in Des Moines in 1921. He attended Drake University, the United States Army Command, and General Staff College. He served in the United States Army from 1941 to 1945. He served in both the House of Representatives and the Iowa Senate. Iowa mustered 46 infantry regiments, 9 cavalry regiments, 4 batteries of light artillery, thousands of replacement units, and 444 soldiers who served in one of the Iowa's 2 totally black regiments. So to kind of understand the Civil War a little bit, and it is quite complicated, I just kind of put some of the key events, leading up to this. So 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation goes into effect. In March, Abraham Lincoln signs the Conscription Act, creating the first national military draft in American history. In August, Robert E. Lee offers to resign as commander of the Army of the Northern Virginia. And in October, Grant was named to command Union Military Division of the Mississippi. November 19, 1863, President Lincoln delivers his Gettysburg Address, and in December, he issues the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. And in 1964, he's nominated for a second term. The worst news possible for the Confederate States of America came on November 8, 1864. Lincoln had won re-election. So this now meant that the Union would have better resources in people and material, and all they had to do was outlast the Confederates battle by battle. And so this kind of sets the stage for what happened in November 30th, 1864, the Battle of Franklin, known as the Second Battle of Franklin. That's where it gets a little confusing with the Civil War stuff. So, they weren't just at that one place, one time. So I'm hoping that I'm presenting all of this accurately, the best that I can. The Franklin-Nashville Campaign, also known as Hood's Tennessee Campaign, was a series of battles in the Western Theater conducted from September 18th through December 27, 1864, in Alabama, Tennessee, and northwestern Georgia. Picture of some battlefield sketches. Quote by the Franklin community: "The men who fought on the fields of Franklin in 1864 sacrificed to live the story. Nearly 150 years later, our generation is called upon to sacrifice to share the story. We will continue to sacrifice our time, talent, and treasure to support our community treasures." The night before the Battle of Franklin, it is believed that 24-year-old Confederate Captain Theodoric Todd Carter spent the night at his friend Green Neely's house. This map shows where the Neely house was, but I think it actually got cut off. Part of that map got cut off, so I'm not sure it's there. Right next to the Columbia Pike. And that means that the entire Federal Army would have marched right past him that night. While General Hood's army had retired for the night, in Spring Hill, General Schofield's army managed to maneuver past the enemy encampment without being spotted. An army of 24,000 Federal soldiers successfully arrived in Franklin before sunrise on November 30th. They took command of Carter's family farm and the Carter Hill. They destroyed barns and part of the Carter cotton gin to create headlogs for the trenches. Carter slipped through Union lines and was near home, but then he realized that his soldiers had taken command, of his farm. Later that evening, he was killed by a bullet to the head. Todd's great niece is Rosalie Carter, so I assume that's the wife of the former president, but then that's her married name, so I'm not sure. This is a picture of the memorable cotton gin at Franklin. Letter written from Captain Addison Lee Ewing, the 63rd Indiana Infantry. All is good here, coming on the heels of a great victory we won over the enemy at Franklin. On November 30th makes us feel good. The Rebs fought desperately. Colonels and generals rode right up to our faces, bringing their men up in fine style. But the Bluecoats wouldn't budge an inch. It was a terrible slaughter. We took almost 3,000 prisoners and 12 colors. Quote from the Franklin community. Our story is embodied in the spirit of the two true living sons who came to Franklin in 2009 to help our community honor and rebury an unknown soldier whose remains were unearthed while a backhoe was digging to put in a Chick-fil-A on the Columbia Pike. Union soldier Harold Becker, whose father fought at Franklin, and Confederate son James Brown Jr., whose father fought at Gettysburg, brought a spirit of humility, camaraderie, and dignity to our community last year. Laura Ingalls Wilder, the author, writes about the Stedmans, who were friends when they lived in Walnut Grove. Their two boys, Johnny and Reuben, were playmates. She wrote, Johnny was always crying, and no wonder, for his mother was always shaking and slapping him. She told of how he was lame, so they had to be good to him, which was hard because he often pulled her hair, pinched her, tore up her books, and broke her playthings. She said neither of the boys were like the cousins, who had always been good fellows. And I said, I probably shouldn't say this, but it kind of reminds me of my Preston cousins, what I went through. Mr. Stedman joined the 2nd Iowa Cavalry in 1861 and was promoted to full sergeant a few months later. He received a disability discharge and then worked as a butcher until he purchased the 11-room Burr Oak House Hotel in Burr Oak, Iowa. He served in a different company, but he was in the same regiment. Pictured is Milton H. Sweet from Brighton, 2nd Iowa Cavalry, Company A. He's buried in Washington County, Iowa. And on the right is a button of the 8th biennial reunion of the 2nd Iowa Cavalry that was held in Davenport in 1897. Soldiers looked forward to receiving mail, but the news wasn't always good. Some soldiers kept diaries like the one pictured. No soldier presented a more formidable sight than the mounted cavalry soldier with all of his arms and accoutrements, mounted upon his charge in the midst of all the paraphernalia and adornments of war, a moving arsenal and military depot. He must have struck surprise, if not terror, in the minds of his enemies. So just his clothing alone was about 20 pounds, and then what he carried on his body even more, so he was carrying his weight near an extra 50 pounds. And then when you add to that everything that you've got strapped to the saddlebags and so on, that horse had a lot to carry. So Bonnie was mentioning about the sword that's at the other museum, and this one looks very, very similar to it. It reads, a token of esteem for our Captain James Robertson, 22nd Iowa. Saddlebags contained many necessary items. They held blankets, blouses, hats, utensils, and decorations. Here's an advertisement for bulletproof vests. I didn't know that they had those, but the soldiers that did bring those usually had to discard them because the horse just couldn't sustain that heavy load. The 2nd Iowa Cavalry lost 1 officer, 59 enlisted men killed and mortally wounded. 2 officers and 270 enlisted men died from disease. Among those were James Skelton Breeden, who was killed May 9, 1862, at Farmington, Mississippi. Isaiah Stewart from Andrew, killed in action at West Point, Mississippi, 1864. Is that a relation of yours, Roger?
Not that I know of.
Okay. William Cronk of Fulton died of disease in 1863 and was buried in the Mississippi River National Cemetery in Memphis. So, I think I'm not going to read all of those states, but there were a lot of states in the Union. The Confederacy, of course, didn't have quite as many, and the border states included Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Missouri. Total Union casualties, 642,427. Confederates, 483,026. Of the total Union casualties, 110,100 were killed in battle. 224,580 died from disease. Over 275,000 were wounded in action, and over 30,000 were prisoners of war. So the term, my husband explained this to me because he's been reading about the Civil War, and otherwise I had to go back and redo this. I thought casualties meant, they died, but that is not the case. So casualties does include those that were wounded and survived and those that were prisoners of war. So the mortality rate for the prisoners of war for the Union was 15.5% and the Confederates 12%. The Union Army had over almost 2.5 million white soldiers, almost 200,000 African American soldiers, and 3,500 Native American troops. Now the enlistment strength for the Army, there's just like a huge range from 750 to over 1 million. They had incomplete records, and their enlistment records, a lot of that had been destroyed. Now for the civilian occupations, maybe it doesn't surprise you, but farmers comprised 48%. The other large categories were mechanics, 24%, and laborers at 16%. Soldiers held 2-day reunions for many years. Following is a partial listing of a few of them. I found this information from the Research Library at the Maine Museum. The 3rd reunion of the 2nd Iowa was held in Muscatine. At the 3rd reunion, a speech given by General Hatch hoped it was not too late to express gratitude to those he had led out over a quarter of a century ago. No commander could be prouder of his followers than was he of one and all of the 2nd Iowa. So just everything I read about the 2nd Iowa, we just really have reason to be proud of these Jackson County men. And I'm sure other regiments too, but Iowa really was so much highly regarded over like the regiments on the, the east. It was moved that Generals Hatch and Elliott take seat on the platform. The order, forward march, was given by the audience, and they marched amidst tremendous cheering. Colonel Elliott told the boys that they wouldn't have ordered him around that way 25 years ago. And they said, no, it's our turn now. Attendees from Company M. So we had 6 from Lakota. Private Robert Nelson Woods is buried in the Asgate Cemetery. He married Belinda Wade and they had 4 children. He was also married to Eliza Larkey and they had 1 daughter. Samuel Gibson was a farmer in Perry Township, son of William and Martha Gibson. He enlisted in 1862 in the same cavalry as his brother Robert. In 1867, he married Miss Jane McChesney, a native of Lawrence County, Pennsylvania, and they had 4 children. Michael Pierce is buried in the Sutton Cemetery. David Hawkins enlisted in Company B, the 26th Iowa Infantry, and then he was discharged for disability, but then he re-enlisted in Company N in 1864. He was married to Josephine Applegate, Nancy Bradley Robbins, and Mrs. Lucy Smith. Nathan Smith was severely wounded May 9, 1862, Farmington, Mississippi. He married Elizabeth Sweezy. I'm not sure if there's a connection there because that doesn't appear to be Marilla's sister Elizabeth. She was married to someone else. William Harrison Lyas from Cottonville and his wife Phoebe E. Anderson Lyas are pictured. They're buried at Mount Hope. William is in the front row on the far right in the group picture. Fulton soldier Richard Fruit McMeans was the husband of Sarah Mask Bell. They're buried in the Andrews Cemetery. On the top left is the mother of Richard, Eliza McClure McMeans. I think what I'm going to tell you here is probably one of the saddest things I've ever read. So the family is at the funeral for their son, R.F. McMeans. The father of the deceased is on a horse. He gets struck by lightning. He dies, and the horse is killed, also. So for that family to go through. William Wiley Branscombe of Spragueville died at age 37 and is buried in Mount Hope. Father of 7 children, his first wife, Martha Jane Smith, died at age 22. He married Melissa Mayers Branscombe, who died in 1913. Hazen and Reed lived in Jackson County at the time of their enlistment. Captain Joseph McConnell resided in Andrew, but was from Pennsylvania. He was appointed captain in 1861. He is buried at Mount Hope. And then Captain Joseph McConnell also attended. Other companies of men who attended this reunion: Morton from Fulton, Madonna from Macokota, and A. McDonald from Fulton. In Company L, Elsner and Springer. Pictured is Charles Elsner. He enlisted in Company L of the 2nd Iowa Cavalry in September 1861. He was promoted to full farrier, and he was transferred out in 1863 after being blinded. So I'm just wondering if he got kicked by a horse or, how he got that injury. Charles married Casper Deppy and was the father of 7 children. The 4th reunion of the 2nd Iowa Cavalry was held in Macokota in 1889. The 2nd Iowa was one of the bravest regiments that ever left the state and was, on many occasions, in the hottest of fights. This regiment was composed of many of the best men in eastern Iowa. From the beginning to the close of the war, there were more than 2,500 names on its roster, of whom about 600 survived, and that was in 1889. They were heartily welcomed to the city in that last picture. The photo was shown of the 27th Infantry. The business meetings were held at the headquarters of Stevens Opera House. And the Opera House is located where the Mexican restaurant is. There was a terrible fire there in 1904. And there was an article where it said that the owner, he had no intentions of ever reopening that as a playhouse again. So not all the soldiers were able to come. So here are a few of the regrets. They were all addressed to George Kelsall, secretary from Canton, Iowa. Your circular regarding the reunion made me homesick, and I cannot get a furlough. A.K. Rogers from Tuscaloosa. Harry Berg from Rock Island wrote, I dread to go, fearing I might be called upon to make another speech. William F. Johnson, 2 years ago at the time of your reunion in Muscatine, I was in Mississippi, looking over the ground where you fought with Forrest and where my father was killed. J.M. Green, Chamberlain, South Dakota. My heart was set on attending. I have an engagement here. I had the misfortune of being elected to the state senate. I am compelled to be there. Members present from Jackson County. Kimball, Gibson, Thompson, McMeans, and Gibson. David Kimball married Ellen. They are the parents of Charles, and they're buried in the Andrews Cemetery. Robert McChesney Gibson was a farmer who lived in Section 20 of Perry Township. After discharge, he returned to Andrew and married, and he and his wife had 5 children. Here, another sad story. 2 sets of twins, and then one, Robert. So, the first set of twins, they were born June 15, 1870, and they died July 6, 1879. So it appears that they both died on the same day. And then their other set of twins must have just died the same day they were born. I'm not sure what his connection is to Samuel Foster. Elias from Cottonville, Say from Iron Hill, Alexander McDonald was the husband of Mary Anderson, and they're buried in Mount Hope. Company L attendees, Springer, Anderson, Usher, and Jenkins. Leverett Washington Usher was a private in Company L. He married Huldah Jane Tubbs. Corporal Danford Jenkins enlisted in Company L at age 21. Was a resident of Macoka and a native of New York. Was promoted to 4th Corporal in 1865. Attendees from Company M were Henton, Flathers, Wood, McConnell, Wilson, and Pierce. Captain McConnell was born in Mercer County, Pennsylvania, husband of Elizabeth King. Barrows and Fortner from Nashville. Alfred Barrows, Alf, was 21 years old when he enlisted. He married Elizabeth Bowling, and 3 children were born to this union. And in the book it said captain, so I'm not sure why I didn't say major. Snyder from Sebula attended, and Justin Miles from Miles also attended. Corporal John Schneider, resident of Sebula, native of New York, died in 1892. He was enlisted in Company L, promoted to sergeant in 1862. In 1864, he was 3rd Corporal. Justin Miles was a quartermaster in Company L. His brother was Forrest M. Miles, for which the town is named. Forrest Miles served in the 24th Infantry. Nohern and Branscombe from Spragueville attended. Invited comrades were listed as Eanes, Haney, McCoy, and Hanson. Lieutenant Haney is pictured with his wife, Elizabeth, and 2 children. In 1864, he was promoted to 1st Lieutenant. General Daniel McCoy served 4 years during the Civil War. He participated in 27 battles and skirmishes, and was wounded at the battles of Stone River, Chickamauga, Georgia, and Franklin, Tennessee, receiving a total of 5 wounds. 3 wounds shattered bones, one of which threatened the amputation of his leg. The 13th reunion was held in Muscatine in 1907. Officers selected were Gibson, Woods, Morden, Albrook, and Leach. Albert Foster Dawson attended the 14th reunion and was the featured speaker. His beloved grandfather had passed away 14 years earlier in 1893, so I've organized the battles that they were in according to his speech. Dawson begins with, I wish that every man and woman of the rising generation and every boy and girl in the schools might know that record and would take to heart in their everyday lives the lessons of courage, determination, devotion to duty, energy and bravery, self-sacrifice and generosity displayed by the 2nd Iowa Cavalry during those 4 long and bitter years. When the regiment was ordered to Bird's Point and followed Jeff Thompson about 1,000 miles through the state, we see them taking the field in the spring of '62, marching and waiting from Bird's Point, fighting every foot of the way, participating in the attack on New Madrid, and the first to enter the works after the fall of Island No. 10. The Battle of Island No. 10 was an engagement at the New Madrid or Kentucky Bend on the Mississippi River, and it occurred between February 28th and April 8th, 1862. Commander for the Union were John Pope and Andrew H. Foote. 7,000 Confederates surrendered and 30 were killed and wounded. The strength of the Union was 3 times that of the Confederates. Brigadier General John Pope was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and served in the Army from 1842 to 1886. He was born in Connecticut and served in the Navy and achieved the rank of Rear Admiral. Quote from Private True Morrell as they departed New Madrid for Vicksburg, who of us will live to pass this place again on our return north and home, home to our friends, but I wish we might all be prepared for whatever may come. The regiment had not been in the field 3 months before it gave a display of that matchless courage which marked its long career when at Farmington it saved the advance guard of the Army of the Mississippi from being cut off and captured by overwhelming force of the enemy. What a thrilling performance was that charge of Farmington, up the hill in a mad, resistless charge, sabers in hand, dashing right on to the rebel artillery, and actually driving the gunners from their pieces. The charge only lasted a few minutes, and yet 50 of those brave men were killed and wounded, and as many more unhorsed by the fire of the army. One time this regiment fought for 60 consecutive hours, thus saving the whole column by their bravery and endurance. The Battle of Farmington, Tennessee was fought in 1863 as part of Confederate Major General Joseph Wheeler's 1863 raid. The battle was fought as Wheeler was retreating back to the Confederate lines. Following a Union cavalry charge, the Confederates were routed, with an entire regiment deserting. Jackson County soldier James Skelton Breeden and John Parker were killed at this battle. Nathan Smith was severely wounded. George Crook was commander of the Battle of Farmington. The Union had the advantage of 25,000 soldiers compared to the Confederates' 4,000 in this battle. And what a powerful lesson in grim determination the present generation can learn from Colonel Elliott's brilliant expedition on Boonesville. I'm just going to kind of skip through some of the rest of that. Shown is a sketch of Nathaniel Lyon leading his troops to victory in Boonville. It was one of the earliest battles in the Civil War. With the federal victory, the Union gained control of the Missouri River Valley and forced the pro-Confederate Missouri State Guard into the southwestern corner of the state, cutting the latter off from the recruits from the north of the Missouri River. The Battle of Colliersville was fought in November 3, 1863. Jackson County soldier Nathan Patterson died from wounds sustained in this battle. The Battle of Colliersville was commanded by Edward Hatch and was a Union victory. It was a stroke of luck for the Union Army when a train carrying Major General Sherman and his headquarters staff, about 260 men, pulled up at the depot. Union commanders ordered reinforcements. When the Confederate Chalmers learned of this, he withdrew. Shown are the Civil War earthworks at Tallahatchie Crossing, which is on the U.S. National Register of Historic Places. And this was built by the Union forces to defend the Mississippi Central Railroad as they moved south, ultimately to Vicksburg. Their courage and determination was only equaled by their devotion to duty. In the fall of '62, we find them participating in the Battle of Iuka, where the enemy lost 1,200 in killed and wounded and 1,000 prisoners. The Battle of Iuka was fought in Mississippi. It was a Union victory with heavy losses on both sides. Jackson County's Corporal Solomon Zook was killed at Iuka. William Rosecrans, nicknamed Old Rosie, commanded over the Battle of Iuka. It was their energy and bravery in a score of exploits which marked the regiment as one of the greatest fighting machines in the whole Army. Their dashing bravery at Boonsville in July '63 helped to make Phil Sheridan a brigadier. And he actually, the Union had 800 men, and they whipped the Confederates, who had 5,000 in the battle. The first Battle of Boonsville was fought June 17, 1861. It was part of the Trans-Mississippi Theater. Strengths on both sides were comparable, and this was commanded by Brigadier General Lyon. He was the first Union general to be killed in the American Civil War. He died on the battlefield in Missouri at age 43 on August 1861. He had been in the Army for 20 years. Then followed the weeks of arduous and dangerous duty, scouting and gaining information as to the strength of the Army, in the saddle, by night as well as by day. Picture of the Battle of Corinth, and Joel Woods was wounded at that battle. The pride of Iowa for this service, which did so much to win the remarkable victory of Corinth, General Rosecrans called them the Eye of the Army. Shown is the 7th Iowa Infantry at Corinth. Confederate casualties at Corinth. The close-up view on the right, on the left, it's the 2nd Texas Infantry. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it's kind of chilling to look at those pictures. Ohio troops shown at the siege of Corinth. Union strength was 120,000 compared to the Confederate 65, but each side sustained casualties of over 1,000. And shown are the commanders of Corinth. There were 6 of them. And these 3. Now, an interesting thing, back to General Grant, when I was at the other museum and talking to Bonnie Mitchell's daughter, Kara Mitchell, she said that she is related to General Grant. So I asked her how. This is what she said. He is her 4th cousin 6 times removed. I think that's still pretty cool. During the following spring, their efforts in like manner made possible the success of Grierson's famous raid. Hatch's part in that brilliant exploit was to attract the attention of the enemy in himself and conceal the march of Grierson, and he was successful. And that was a Union victory. Orders reached the 2nd that under Colonel Grierson it was to cut railroad and telegraph communications behind the walls of Vicksburg, after what General Grant calls one of the most brilliant cavalry exploits of the war. The expedition accomplished its objective. So that was really a huge battle. I mean, you don't hear about that as much as you do like some of the other battles, but that was very important. Benjamin Grierson was born in Pennsylvania. And that was part of, his raid was part of the Vicksburg campaign. Now in this raid, Jackson County men Wallace, Abel, and James McComb died at LaGrange, which is part of that battle. Confederate General Sam Golson, they had the misfortune, when he was commanding, to have, do you say that, I'm not sure if this is how you say it, .54 caliber weapons, but their ammunition was .58. So they might, some say he was killed, but he actually went on to serve in the House of Representatives for Mississippi. It was in the Battle of Nashville and the Pursuit of Hood in '64, until his great army was driven en route from Tennessee, that the regiment won its greatest renown and taught the world a new lesson in cavalry warfare. What magnificent courage and determination, energy and bravery they displayed at Nashville. So they did a lot of hand-to-hand fighting in that battle. And here's the rebel line shown. There were heavy casualties on both sides. The colors of the 2nd Iowa were the first to float from the captured redoubts, raised by Sergeant Hartman, who fell mortally wounded while in the act of planting the flag. This is the Union flag as it appeared during the Civil War. To this splendid record for gallantry that the regiment in March '65 added fresh laurels for generosity when they voluntarily turned over to others their Spencer carbines, taking in an equal exchange of inferior guns. Wilson became one of the few Union commanders to defeat Confederate Cavalier Nathan Bedford Forrest. And this, I don't know if you've read much about Forrest, but I don't know, some of the things that they did. There were more battles that weren't mentioned in the speech, like the Battle of Tupelo that Andrew Smith commanded. And he handed Nathan Bedford Forrest his only major defeat at this battle. And then there was the Fort Pillow massacre. And they were surrendering, but because they were black soldiers, they weren't going to take them as prisoners. And so that was awful, what happened there. 1 out of every 5 Iowans who enlisted, which is about 13,100, gave the supreme sacrifice for the Union. 3,540 died or were mortally wounded in battle. 515 died as prisoners of war. 448 died in accidents. 8,498 of disease. Fewer states suffered proportionally greater losses than their native sons in those 4 years that tested our nation. I'm almost done, guys. Sorry. The rest of the slides will go back fast. Okay, so the burials of the 2nd Iowa Cavalry, 2 at Andersonville, 1 at Annapolis, Chattanooga, Corinth, Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, Keokuk, Iowa, Marietta, Georgia, Battle of Memphis, Mound City, Illinois Naval Base, Franklin, Tennessee, Franklin National Campaign, New Albany, Indiana, Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee, Battle of Shiloh, Rock Island, Illinois, the barracks, Vicksburg, the Battle of Vicksburg. And then there was an explosion, the Sultana, that was the worst maritime disaster in the United States history, and no one was ever held accountable for that. So when the men returned home, there was a lot of rejoicing, but then also a lot of sadness over what had happened. And I wanted to explain that the cavalry, some cavalry regiments, went on to fight in the Indian Wars, and there are some things that, we shouldn't be too proud of that happened there. From what I can see, none of these men from Jackson County, they, when they were done with their service, they came back and went on with their lives, so they did not participate in that. So when Samuel Foster returned from the war, he sold his farm, he purchased a mercantile business, and he and his wife's brother George were partners. And it's kind of sad, but he was such an honorable man, and he let a lot of people buy him credit. They didn't pay him back, and he just really was in financial straits because of that, and died, without much money. And there was a reunion. These participants, men who spilled one another's blood and watched it spilled on American soil, found the generosity of spirit and looked past interest and just plain hate as they looked one another in the eyes in the reunions for many years after the Civil War ended, and saw a real human being who was caught up in the absurd nightmare between 1861 and 1865. Any questions? That was a lot. Sorry. I cut it down. I'm just so proud of these men. I just had no idea what, the sacrifice that they made for all of us. Thank you.